Good afternoon, everyone. If I can call this meeting to order, please. Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, September 15th, 2014. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Bob Blumenfield and Councilmember Mike Bonin. And we are ready to begin with the regular order of business. Members, items 6 to 10 are refund claims, and I'd like to propose those as potential consent candidates unless either of you have questions or concerns. Seeing none, those matters are approved on consent. That brings us then to our closed session items 1 and 2. And since I always seem to guess wrong about this, can I have a show of hands of the people who will be in our closed session? It's 50-50. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll proceed to the other room for our closed session items. I have no cards on items 1 or 2. Is there anybody who'd like to offer comment on items 1 or 2? Seeing none, public comment on those items is closed, and we will now proceed to the other room for closed session.
I didn't realize you guys were waiting.
All right, thank you all very much for your patience. We're now back in our regular agenda items in open session, and we'll proceed next with item number 3.
Item number 3 is the City Administrative Officer Report relative to the approval and acceptance of the negotiated exchange of property tax revenue resulting from the negotiated annexation 2013-06 to the City of Los Angeles, Jordan Downs.
And we have CAO and Hackla, I think, both to report on this, right?
Good afternoon, Council members. Madeline Rackley with the CAO. The report before you is a request to approve and accept a negotiated exchange of property tax revenue resulting from the annexation of approximately 42 acres in Council District 15 adjacent to what is known as the Jordan Downs housing development. The boundary adjustment process requires two things. First, we need to assess the service and fiscal impacts to the city. For this project, the city hired a consulting firm called Hogle Ireland to assess the potential service and fiscal impacts to the city as a result of the potential boundary change. Hogle Ireland spoke with Bureau of Street Services, Bureau of Sanitation, Bureau of Street Lighting, Police, Fire, Recreation and Parks, and other departments as part of their reporting process, and determined that on day one of the annexation, the proposed annexation, there would be minimal fiscal and service impacts to the city. Future costs to the city would depend on the schedule of the construction of an expansion of the Jordan Downs housing project. So the first year or so to the impact to the city will be very small, and over time there may be tax revenues or other service impacts to the city which would be handled as part of the budget process. The second part, and the main part of the report that is before you today, part of the annexation process requires that the county and the city sign a joint resolution approving the negotiated tax exchange. The county calculated the tax exchange and provided us with a resolution which is in attachment 1 of the CAO report. The initial resolution stated that the city would receive $58,550 annually in tax revenues. once the annexation takes place. This is in error, and they have provided a replacement resolution, which is before you, which actually just eliminates in and every fiscal year thereafter. So we will receive one-time tax revenue of $58,550, and then the subsequent years, the tax revenues will be incremental based on the actual property values, and that may change over time as the properties are developed. So we would request that we replace attachment 1 with the correct resolution today.
So in future years, it will just be according to whatever the assessed value is?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so that would mean that the recommendation and the recommendation in the CAO report would stay the same, but the fiscal impact statement would be altered. We would take out the word annually. There will be a positive impact to the general fund of $58,550, no annually. So, so the request today is that the council adopt this negotiated exchange of property tax revenue with the replaced resolution. And I'm here to answer any questions. The staff from Hackler are here also to talk with you about the project. I think we also provided you with a map of the project, and they are here if you would like to discuss the project itself. The entitlements, everything has already gone through Plum and Council. The Boundary Adjustment Board has also reviewed this project. Today we are just discussing the tax implications of going forward with the boundary adjustment.
So what are the additional responsibilities that the city will need to be taking on that have a budgetary impact? Maintenance of Alameda Street, I assume.
Yes.
What are the others?
Actually, the city is already providing some of the services because, due to the location of these properties. Depending on who you call for 911, the sheriff or the police could show up. The LA Fire or County Fire could show up. So there are very few impacts right now, and I could get details on the actual impacts, but the departments will absorb these for the first year. They're so minimal that for the first year there just won't be any obvious impacts.
Okay. And will the property tax increment that we'll be receiving with the annexation, is it the plan that that'll be devoted to some sort of a pilot program like much of the rest of Jordan Downs has now, or?
Right. No, the tax revenue from this annexation will be tax revenue to the city. It has not yet been included in any projections, but it would be tax revenue to the city.
Okay.
It's new tax revenue.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Just so I understand, so the real financial impacts, you know, when you have more people there and you've got businesses and all sorts of other things, we don't have any, because that's what threw me off, and I'm glad you corrected the annually thing, because I think going down the road, you have a lot more people, your businesses,
Exactly.
you're going to have a lot more tax revenue, for one thing, but you're also going to have more costs. You're going to have
Exactly.
people and police responding and fire and all the things that we have whenever we have land. But there's no projection of what those costs are going to be in terms of whether it's going to net positive, negative. I guess it's going to depend on what gets built and EIRs that get done at this time, right?
Exactly, and that will be handled through the budgetary process, because each year, as housing is built or real estate is developed, that would be part of a department's budget proposal. So the fire department may come and say, we've now reached a threshold where we need additional services, and that would be part of what they would propose in their annual budget.
There's no way to project out even rough. There's got to be relations, like we know that when we get this much land, we have these, on average, costs that go up.
Well, the land is vacant right now, so there's nothing on it. So Yes, we could do a projection. For full build-out, it would be about 10 years from now, I think. It's about a 10-year project. So if you would like that, I can certainly put that together for you.
I don't know. I don't want to ask. I don't want to ask for it. I mean, it might be useful, but I don't think it's going to change our decisions on this. So I don't know that we need to do that. But I yield to my colleagues or the chair on that.
I'd be happy to do something if you'd like.
One would assume that with the development comes a higher appraised value, and so as costs of service increase, so will the property tax revenues, I assume. Is that a fair assumption?
That would be a fair assumption. Plus, there will be some retail and commercial properties there with some sales tax revenues as well.
Okay. Now, there's currently some issues with underground storage tanks, as I understand it, or some environmental concerns in the area.
Good afternoon, Ramin Kianfar, Senior Project Manager with HACLA. The 21-acre vacant property that's subject to the annexation was used for decades as an industrial site. It's vacant now and ready for us to start cleanup process. So it does have some minor environmental issues, no underground storage tanks as far as we know, but some cleanup needs to be done on it, which we plan to start by the end of this year.
So HACLA will bear the cost
has assumed that responsibility, correct.
Okay. And there's a number of special districts that overlay this, lighting district, road district, and so forth. Will those?
Well, a specific plan has been approved for the entire 100-acre area, which outlines, the streets, the specific uses, height limits, design guidelines, et cetera.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of those maintenance districts, the street lighting district and the road district and so on. Who assumes those responsibilities? Do the districts remain in place and then they just have a different overlord, if you will? Or
you're right. Those haven't been contemplated yet, but it's presumed that the property owners will, each developer for each block or several blocks will assume responsibility for those maintenance districts.
So those county districts will need to become city special districts then.
Right.
So how does this all fit in with, process-wise, what do we need to do going forward? I assume council approves and then it goes to LAFCO for...
Before it goes to LAFCO, it must also go to the supervisors, the county supervisors for the same type of approval. And once the joint tax resolution has been approved, then it goes to LAFCO for its process and hearing.
Okay, and then the special districts, you have to create new ones and put it out to a vote again, or how does that work?
I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure how the special districts are handled.
I assume that with the annexation, you terminate the county districts, and then we'd have to figure out whether or not a city special district.
The resolution actually does that. The resolution before you terminates the districts and adds the city districts. So I think that is handled in this resolution. Because it's on the first page of the resolution, it talks about withdrawing from the county districts.
Okay.
So,
has city attorney weighed in on the resolution?
I'm sorry, Stephen.
Has the city attorney weighed in on the resolution? Just and specifically, I'm thinking, we're assuming responsibility for a large parcel of land. I'd like the city attorney to be able to assess whether or not we're assuming any liabilities, that we should be aware of, that maybe we should have indemnification for, or something like that within the terms of the resolution. I don't know. The city attorney might have an opinion on that.
Councilmember, let me find out about that. The city attorney has read the resolution, but we didn't ask specifically about liabilities or indemnification, but we will before it goes to council.
Okay.
We'll take care of that.
Good.
And maybe as part of that, because I don't quite understand, it doesn't make sense to me how we can, by fiat, extend these special districts from the county to the city when some of them have to be voted on by the property holders, right? When they created those special districts?
the resolution terminates the county.
Right, but I
Right.
thought I heard you say, maybe I misheard, you said it terminates and then creates it as a city district. And I don't think we can do that, but I would defer to our attorneys. I don't think we can just create a special district if it was created by the vote of the property holder to start with. I would imagine it would have to go back to a vote of the property holder, and that us passing a resolution doesn't have any weight. I don't know. I mean, I'm throwing that out there. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I would put that on the list when you have the city attorney looking at it.
We'll do it.
Because it just, intuitively, I would imagine that would not work.
Let me confirm that, how that process works.
Okay.
But the resolution before you, if I stated we were creating city districts, I misspoke. This terminates and detaches us from the county.
Makes sense.
But let me confirm about the process, because I can do that. We'll take care of that.
Great.
Okay, and is there any time urgency on this?
I will defer to Hakla on that.
Well, we'd like to proceed as quickly as possible, obviously, and I wouldn't call it an emergency, but certainly time is of the essence. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
The LAFCO process has some elapsed time that needs to take place. It's about a 2 to 3 month process because they do public noticing and have meetings and feedback and things.
Okay. All right, Mr. Bonin, anything on this? All right, then with the comments that we've offered, it'll be the action of the committee to approve the recommendations, and then hopefully we can get some of these responses back prior to it coming before council.
With the replaced resolution?
Yes,
With the new
as
resolution?
amended,
Great, thank you. We'll get,
Do you have text of that? Because I don't have it.
you have a copy, and we'll work with the clerk to
Oh,
make
I
sure
take it
that
back. I do have
that
it.
gets added.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to item number 4.
Item number 4 is the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee report relative to the delivery of tree trimming services. Council referred the matter to Budget and Finance Committee on September 10th, 2014.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councilman. Ron Lorenz on Bureau of Street Services. What you have before you is a request to move over $500,000 from the one of two accounts, the $2 million account that's already been appropriated, and the overbalance account, the $2 million, which has still not been assigned to the best of my knowledge, to the Bureau of Street Services to utilize to have staff trim the number of trees that can be trimmed for $500,000, roughly approximating $33,333 per council district, evenly distributed. And to the best of my knowledge, that's what's before you here today as per council's instruction last Thursday.
Okay. Before we dive into the discussion, members, I do have a couple of cards which I'd like to hear first. So why don't we start with Art Sweatman, who will be followed by Dr. Molly Rhodes. And if anybody else would like to fill out a card and bring it forward, please, this is your time to do it. Mr. Sweatman, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Art Ciep. I'm a tree surgeon with the Bureau of Street Services Urban Forestry Division, and of course we welcome any kind of money that you would like to bring back to us so that we can trim trees in-house. There's a sense of urgency right now with the community. People want us to start trimming trees again. We badly need to do it. We can do this better than contractors. We can provide you better service. We can do it for much less money, and we'd like the opportunity to prove that. We need to rehire people. This is very, very urgent, and we can't keep telling our constituents, sorry, we don't trim your trees anymore. We only respond to emergencies. So we would welcome a chance to prove ourselves again and to show that we can do it better for less.
Thank you. Dr. Rhodes?
Hi.
Welcome.
So on the theme of doing better for less, one of the hidden costs with, we see 3 hidden costs with contracting out that aren't accounted for in the current CAP process. I sent your office this Friday a little one-page memo, and should have gone around. It may look familiar during the Budget and Finance hearings. I presented it to you then. And it shows what happens when we lose our core services and see astronomical bid increases that were as high as, one of them came in as high as 129% higher than what it should have. And then on top of that, with contracting out, you've also got the cost of the bid process itself, which, and if you've got, have to do it multiple times because you get bids like this, then, none of those costs are currently measured. And then additionally, you've got to keep on top of the contracts, both in field inspections and also just the managing of the contracts. And those costs currently aren't calculated when you look at body next to body. So we want to raise that. Thanks.
Thank you. Members? Mr. Bonner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I got to say I agree with Mr. Sweatman that we can do this better ourselves than we can with contractors. I'm increasingly convinced by Dr. Rhodes that we can actually do it more cheaply. I am absolutely convinced, without question, about Mr. Sweatman saying that we can do it better. I've had disastrous problems with contractors in my district. I've had whole neighborhoods that felt like, their little mini urban forest was destroyed. Before we get into sort of the cost stuff, I'm curious about our monitoring of our contracts and how often someone gets dinged or removed from the list or not paid. I know we'll go out and we will check, and I noticed in one of the reports it said if we find them at fault, we have the option of not paying them or removing from the list. Another one said we have the option of telling them they might not get paid in the future. Can you tell me what the circumstances there?
Surely. The process, first let me back up and talk about the way we inspect contracts real quickly. The Bureau has inspectors assigned to each contract. Typically, if we have a large amount of money, like $4 million is quite a large pot of money, we will have multiple contracts. I believe last year there were 7 contracts. And we do not have enough supervisors to have one inspector assigned to each contract, which would be ideal. Somebody that basically lives with the contractor on a day-to-day basis. Typically, the Bureau of Street Services Urban Forestry Division inspectors visit a contractor probably every other day. That's probably about the frequency that they would visit them. Now, the options if they're not performing up to the specifications of the contract. The first violation obviously would be speaking to them, asking them and telling them what they have to do to meet the specifications. If it doesn't stop at that point, they can then be a written evaluation of their performance. It's quite a long process to get to the point where they would be in default of the contract. It's only happened in my experience here one time with a landscape contract many years ago. It's not something that the city would take on lightly because it is a very long process. So we try to ensure compliance by just meeting with the contractor and having them perform as they are supposed to. And Councilman Bonin, I know that in your district, I was aware of that. Actually, I am no longer with Urban Forestry, but I was aware of what was occurring. I pay attention still. And they actually did deal with that contractor, but the process to do it is codified, and it does take quite a few steps, and you have to be very diligent in your documentation, and you have to go through the process to actually find somebody in default. Now, they could not be paid for particular trees. In other words, if they don't trim a tree to specifications, that payment for that tree can be withheld, or trees, the payment can be withheld. And I would like to say that you made a comment about city workers. There's no question that the city workers, because of the way we monitor on a daily basis, the people that supervise are supervising. They're with the crew all the time. So if there are problems, they're handled immediately, number one. Number two, the city forces are extremely flexible. That was in the report too and was brought up at council the other day. We can move around very quickly. We can respond to emergencies extremely quickly. I don't think there's any contract that could ever, in any way, shape, or form, compete with the ability of city forces to deal with emergencies, period. The Urban Forestry Division is probably the best emergency response group in the city outside of police and fire. I would be willing to state that.
So we have found a contractor in default only once in your memory, and that was over a decade ago.
To the best of my knowledge that I can remember.
So I think I'll infer from that either we're pretty satisfied with the quality of our contractors' work, or we're left with just really the ability to try to nag people into doing a better job than our constituents feel they're doing.
I would say it's probably 60 your former and 40 the latter. I'm not saying that the nagging is the way to go, but I would say that generally that we've been fairly satisfied with most of the contractors, and they respond. Understand, one of the problems with the contracting of urban forestry tasks is the fact that we have such a small pool. And this has been evidenced by the rapid increase, and as the person before me said, the rapid per tree cost increase, which has really dramatically skyrocketed. Why is that happening? Probably because there's no person on the other side, i.e. city forces, to compete with any longer, because we don't have the staff to do that. So
60% of the work is great and 40% might be somewhat problematic?
yes.
That to me is a
It's significant.
is a very large, significant number.
We just have to stay on top of them, is what we're saying.
I'd say that to me, that feels like we don't have sufficient quality control through the contracting process. To me, that argues more for internal.
That's true.
I wanted to ask about the complaints I get from wildlife activists, Audubon Society members about the lack of compliance by our contractors. I don't really get this complaint with city forces, but by our contractors with the Migratory Bird Act. What exactly are we supposed to be doing or requiring our contractors to do or not do because of the Migratory Bird Act?
That's a very good question. The contract specs detail, and I'm not an expert in the Migratory Bird Act, and there's several bird acts besides just the Migratory Bird Act. There's the Songbird Act. There's several bird acts. Actually, in your district, I think they all come into play because you have a lot of migratory birds in your district because of the Ballona Creek area. The City of Los Angeles is not the agency that's overseeing the actual compliance with those acts. Those are federal and state issues. But I will say that palm trees specifically, because we do have language in the contract dealing with palm trees and the inability to prune between April and June during those months, because that's in the most profligate amount of bird nesting occurs. So that's in the contracts. Now, as far as handling a complaint regarding that, urban forestry would receive that complaint, or potentially they could go right straight to the agency overseeing that, which would be the feds or the state, and we would then move it up the chain in that regard. There have been one or two instances where this became an issue. Was actually before you were councilman. They're down by the harbor, in the marina. We had one where actually was city forces had to deal with some very specific birds. We haven't had that many problems, but I'm sure that it potentially could occur. But back to your point about inspection, ideally we would want to have an inspector with the contractors on a daily basis to see what they do. And that would really, which requires us filling some spots for inspections, which is what urban forestry feels we should do.
Right. I also want to ask another question about other city agencies that do tree trimming. During the budget process, I had asked about the potential for consolidation of our tree trimming. The example I used during the budget process was Mandeville Canyon in my district in Brentwood. I know of 3 agencies that do tree trimming there. If there's a stop sign that was blocked, Mr. Sweatman would probably be out there trimming the tree. But the fire department also goes out, and they have contractors who trim the bottom of the canopy so that the fire trucks can get through. And then we also have DWP that comes out and trims the top of the trees so they don't interfere with the electrical wires. I also imagine, does Rec and Parks have its own tree trimming unit?
Recreation Parks also has their own tree trimming department.
Or was General Services?
General Services would contract. They don't have their own staff.
So, but that they also do tree trimming and they would contract out for it?
I would like to say that they were doing it on public facilities, but I don't think tree trimming on public facilities is occurring, so.
Oh, no, it is.
Okay, then they would be doing that.
Yeah, I've seen it at my West LA office.
That's a good
recently,
thing.
For instance.
Which needs it, by the way.
Yeah, well, it needs a lot of stuff. So that's at least 5 different city agencies. I had asked for a report back on consolidation. I don't see that in anything. I don't anticipate, or I don't fault you for that. I don't think street services or BOSS or Public Works would be the right place to do that because it involves so many other departments. So I'm wondering if the CAO's office is going to be doing a report on potential for consolidation of tree trimming?
The chief from our Public Works group is here and can respond to that.
David Hirano from the Office of the CAO. Councilmember, if you want us to do a report, we will do a report. Simple as that.
Thank you. That was one of the budget requests. And I'll tell you the reason why I ask. I mean, it's just, one, it seems odd that we would have 3 different agencies that might be trimming almost simultaneously on the same street. I'm less convinced that, say, for instance, the bird stuff, the protection of the wildlife is going to be monitored as strongly by the fire department or DWP, which is probably not as fluent in those laws or those federal regulations. But I also wonder if there isn't a way, if all these other agencies are contracting out, and we have all of those other hidden costs that Dr. Rhodes has pointed out, if the money that DWP is paying couldn't be paid to the Public Works Department to help cover some of their costs, and we can spread that out.
Yeah, Councilman, the questions you're raising are questions that we've grappled with throughout at least my tenure here in the last 24 years, and the answers are a little more complicated from agency to agency. They each have their own reasons for wanting to maintain their own forces, and they all feel that they do an adequate job at the type of trimming that they do.
But a lot of them contract out.
Yes, but that also doesn't mean that we couldn't look at it again and we couldn't have subsequent conversations with them to see if there are any additional efficiencies that could be achieved at this point in time by consolidation, whether it be through city forces or contracts or both. We can do that, and we can report back. Based on some of the conversations we've had in the past, I'm not too hopeful, but we can still definitely try again and see what we can come up with.
Well, I mean, my feeling is if DWP can bill Record Parks for water, then DWP should be able to pay Public Works for tree trimming. It just seems like that would make some sense. You said that based on previous conversations, you're not that hopeful. Why?
Well, partly because the Recreation and Parks and Department of Water and Power are proprietary in nature, and they have the ability to spend money as they see fit. So we have a very limited ability to force them into a consolidation situation if they do not want to be part of one. If they want to be, then, and if we ask them, they decide they want to be, then we can make something work. They also have a different strategy up at DWP than they do in Public Works on how they approach trees. So there's a cultural difference as well that would have to be bridged. I don't think it's impossible, but what's really tends to be the most limiting factor is whether DWP and Recreation and Parks would like to participate in a consolidation or not. If they don't, then we can do a lot, but we really can't get there to a full consolidation as you would envision it. So, but we haven't talked about this subject for several years. There's no harm in us going back with new general managers, having this conversation with them and seeing where they stand at this point. So we can do that for you.
And they all work with the mayor, so maybe the mayor's office can help.
I think they all have new general managers too since the last time we've had that conversation.
Okay. Thank you.
And should be noted, recall that 4 years ago, when we were facing substantial layoffs in urban forestry, the council made the decision to try to encourage DWP to take on people from the city side to do tree trimming with the theory that they're still trimming trees in the city, but I'm not convinced that has worked out either from a budgetary standpoint or for, quality of work standpoint that as well as we would have hoped. And, we still don't have reports back on whether or not that really has helped. So.
Well, I know DWP did take some of the employees to help with the avoidance of layoff, and I know DWP at the time was having trouble recruiting employees into their tree trimming function. So for them, it was kind of a win-win. For Public Works, it was a win-win. Since that happened, we heard one or two of the employees that went up there had second thoughts about the work, because the work is different than the work that Public Works does. But once they were transferred up there, there wasn't any real opportunities for them to come back. So,
Mr. Bloomfield.
Thank you. And I certainly agree with the points that my colleagues have been making. And yeah, if other city agencies are going to contract out in some ways, they should contract out within the city to city services to do this stuff. That would be a win-win overall. And I'm trying to get my head around some of the numbers that I see in the report. And because at the end of the day, what I'd love to see is an apples-to-apples comparison, which includes the costs that Dr. Rose was talking about, with the cost of the bid process, the cost of, the loss of competition or how much we're gouged, and the cost of inspection and management. What are those costs and how do they factor in? And so that would be good to see somehow in terms of really understanding the difference. But just in the numbers that we have, I just wanted to get your help in understanding. What I'm seeing is that Bureau Street estimates the direct cost of using city staff is $3.8 million, which is which it says exceeds by $600,000 the cost of using contractors at $4.4, which actually should probably be the other way around. It's less than the cost of using contractors by $600,000. But then it says when you do the indirect costs, you compare it to 4.6 for contractors. What are just to understand, so the indirect costs of contractors goes up by 200,000. What are we adding into that costs that make that cost? Is it the cost of the supervisors?
Those are indirect costs, and I would defer to Mr. Hirano on that question.
You're deferring to me on your report?
On the financial question, yes, sir.
Yeah, I guess, I don't mean to get too caught up in the weeds, but it's just, I look at the numbers and they have to add up in my head, or I do get caught up in it.
Well, Council Member, I think Public Works Committee had a similar concern. So their report, which I think is before you, actually instructs our office to go back and do the calculations, come back and report back to you. So we could validate the calculations that Street Services did, come back with what we think is right.
Because even in the way it's set up, it's talking about the cost of contractors, and it uses two different numbers, the 4.4 and the 4.6. And so there must be something that they're adding into the contractor cost.
Conceptually, when you're talking about counting the cost of contractors, you would not only count the costs that the contractors bid for and that you actually would invoice, but you'd have to count the costs of contract administration as well. And that would include oversight as well as administration.
Because Dr. Rose was talking about some of those costs in reference to the cost of management and inspection, which according to this would be $200,000, but I doubt that they included the cost of the bid process or the cost of the competition law.
These were our figures, and they did not.
Okay.
These were the Bureau's figures, and they did not. They included basically a management analyst and the actual supervision for the inspection process and the contract administration. It did not include all of the peripheral things that you have mentioned.
But even in what was included, maybe when you go back to reformat, I'd love to see that broken out so that we actually know what's being compared. Because according to this also, when you include indirect costs, which I assume is pensions and other types of things,
right,
you're then exceeding by $800,000 the cost of contracting out. And so then the question is, obviously all these other things have a value, and there's a value in terms of the number of trees that are trimmed and how we, in order to make a good judgment, we just have to have more inputs in terms of what's, and everything in my intuition says it's going to be cheaper to do it in-house. So that's not my question at all, but I want to understand it and be able to justify it, and the numbers that I have don't do that.
Well, if you approve the Public Works Committee report, you'll be concurring in their instruction to us to come back with those numbers for you. We will do that and provide you whatever information we can to help you with that decision. I will say that, our office believes that there is a justification for a balance between both contracting and city staff, that neither one is the exact answer, but that both are necessary at this point. So,
right, and I get that.
So the question is, where do you move the needle, I guess?
We move the needle, and what are the inputs that you're using to determine the mix?
Correct.
I think we all agree, in fact, probably even to some extent our public speakers would agree that there is some role for contracting as well as in-house. But the concern I have is that we're without the comparative cost information that we need to determine what that appropriate ratio is. And yet we're, by this action, appropriating the entire amount that we have set aside in the budget for tree trimming and setting an allocation. And a tiny fraction of it is for in-house tree trimming, and almost all of it is for contracting. And yet we don't know whether that's justified. So I'm increasingly frustrated because I think we've been talking about this for at least as long as I've been here, what the appropriate balance is. And right now, under the current budget, under the current resources, we don't have enough supervision of the existing contracting that we're doing. Now we're talking about adding another over $3 million, $3.5 million for more contracting. Without adding any more for additional supervision, we're going to be further deeper in that hole. So, I just want to think out loud here with my colleagues for a minute. The minimum that I would suggest doing is appropriating some additional amount for more supervision of contractors with this. Rather than putting the whole $3.5 million in the contract, let's hold some portion of that back for more supervision to make sure our contracts are actually doing their job. So that would be number one. But number two, I'm wondering if I am very respectful of the fact that all of us and our colleagues are really eager to get this money out on the streets and to get trees trimmed. And it is an urgent situation, and the backlog is ludicrous. And we all know that, and we have to fix it. On the other hand, I don't know that we have to fix the entire ball of wax with one shot right now. Wouldn't there be some utility in saying, let's perhaps appropriate some portion of this for contracting now, some portion of it for additional supervision, and then hold a portion of it in the UB until we get these numbers back so that we can have a better model for how to move forward. Maybe we're going to want to spend half of this money for creating new positions and hiring people. We don't know. We don't have enough basis really to make that assessment right now. So one approach might be to say, well, let me ask you the question first
yes,
of all. In order to have adequate supervision of the current contractors that we have and the current contracted tree trimming that we have, what additional resources would you need in order to achieve that?
Councilman, I would have to come back with a specific number because I don't know the exact number of contracts. I believe the number is 7, and we have 3 people appropriated now. So the answer to that question, if that were the fact, would be 4 additional people.
So you need at least 4 new positions, so probably...
I would say at least 4 people additionally. And I would also like to say that the report was actually asking this $500,000 appropriation to the city forces this right now as kind of a stopgap, but to continue to explore exactly what you're saying. We still realize that we need to get the trees trimmed, and I think we all agree that we're going for the 15-16 budget year to really then go out, hire more people, because it would take that long anyway to get those people on board, and then to appropriate some amount of money from that, assuming that there's going to be another $4 million appropriated for the next fiscal, and take maybe half that money, hire the people out, and get back to hiring city staff again and continually funding that. And I think there is a model for this contract city forces equilibrium. There is a model, and it was back in 2002. If you go back and look at 2002, and you look at the money that was appropriated for contracts that year, as well as the city budget for urban forestry at that year, although it was more money than currently is being discussed, I do not believe, and I'd have to go back and look, that it's that much more. And we had a model that trimmed then approximately 40 to 45,000 trees by city forces, as well as respond to emergencies in a very timely fashion, as well as contracting out a significant amount of trees, which had us on a tree trimming cycle that year, I think it was 2002, of approximately less than 6 years, which is almost getting down to where that we really need to be to properly maintain our trees, like Beverly Hills does, like Santa Monica does, like Glendale does, like Burbank does, and not have emergencies, and significantly reduce our emergencies by having a recycle that is often enough and continuous enough, and I think that's the key, to actually start to impact our emergencies. Because although we've had a 10-year average over the last 20, it's been up and down. 1 year it's 6, the next year is 20, and then it's 12, and then it's 35. So over this 20 years, we've had a 10-year cycle, so we continue to have emergencies, because 10 years is not often enough. We need to trim our street trees on a 5-year cycle. And if we did that, what we would see over time is maybe even the ability to then reduce the number of contracts. Because trees, we would then have a model on which we could base things. But the fact is that in 2002, we had 235 people at Urban Forestry. Now we have 99. And unfortunately, that little slightly less than half staffing didn't result in just having the amount of trees that Urban Forestry could trim. It eliminated the number of trees that could I call it the lack of critical mass. Some point between 235 and 99, we lost the ability to trim any trees and only respond to emergencies. That's what happened at the Bureau. I don't know where that was. Maybe it was 110, maybe it was 120 people. I don't know. But you're exactly right. We need to, and perhaps this year, and I will go back and report to both Director Salceda and to George Gonzalez that this is what we need to do. We need to, this year, take the money for contracts. We need to track all of our costs incurred for inspection. We need to come back with real numbers. But I think the report was written in such a fashion that that's really what this year was going to be. Let's go ahead and get the numbers. Let's allocate the money, and I am pushing to allocate that $500,000 because I think it's really important for that on-demand trimming. And move forward with the contracts. But that's, of course, up to you all to make that decision. But I would lobby that for this fiscal year, that's probably the best use of the money. And see, maybe we could allocate another certain amount of money to try to, but we're going to be taking from existing forces if we were going to inspect all the contracts with an individual inspector that we really can't afford to lose.
Yeah, well, I think I'm okay with that, because it's great to spend money and get trees trimmed, but if they're creating disasters in neighborhoods in Mr. Bonin's district and in mine and Mr. Blumenfield's because they're not being properly supervised, then what's the point of spending the money?
I don't
and in many respects, I think these contractors can cause more harm than good if they're trimming trees in a way that's going to detract from the health of the trees, cause premature death of the trees, cause limbs to fall into the public right-of-way. There's a number of ways that bad contracting makes us worse off than we would be if we didn't do it at all. So I really think that if we're going, I'm all for moving with great urgency on this because we all know that there's a crisis, but I feel uncomfortable with the idea of bumping up our contracted amount even more when right now we have insufficient in-house supervision of those contractors. If we're going to, and I think you have a fair point that staffing up is going to take until 15, 16 anyway. I mean, just to go through the process of,
yes, sir.
The exams and everything else, going through the civil service process between now, to get staffed up, we probably couldn't begin before July 1 anyway, realistically. So maybe that relieves a little bit of my concern about holding some of this money back, but I would want to, I think we have to allocate some of this money for supervision. And if you indicated 4 positions, that's probably $500,000 or so.
For 4 positions? The direct costs are right around $200,000, I think, for the supervision, maybe a little bit more than that, $250,000, the direct cost for the labor.
So, I'm sorry, did you came up to the table, did you want to add something?
Oh, no, I was just mentioning that's about $90,000 each per
Okay,
position.
yeah,
For
that's
indirect
what I
costs, just
yeah.
direct costs for
For a full year.
a full year.
For a full year, but we're already well into the year,
Yes.
so. So if we were to set aside, say, $500,000 of the 3.5 to staff up and supervision, at least to keep.
Yeah, I mean, the trade-off is obviously we're getting less trees done, but I agree with your underlying point, which is you've got to do it right.
And I would say I totally agree. I think this is a factor that's never been included in contracting, and it obviously should. The Bureau of Engineering doesn't do projects like that. They include soft costs in their contracts. And unfortunately, when things were flush at the city, we were able to do all of these things. And now when we are faced with tougher financial times, we must face, kind of like the private sector where I worked for 20 years. These are factors in the private sector that you would never put off for another time because it affects your profit. So you would obviously deal with those on a daily basis. But I definitely feel like we need to include those soft costs, whatever it costs, in the cost of the contract.
Members, I know this is unusual, but Mr. Sweatman only used less than a minute of his time, and he seems like he's about to jump out of his seat. So I want to ask Mr. Sweatman, because I actually have gotten so much valuable information from him over the years. I want to invite him to come on back
Thank you.
for another minute.
I appreciate it. It'll be very short. We have the supervisors. They're transitional workers in the Bureau of Street Services right now, and all we need to do is transition them back. Their transitional period is coming to an end, and we're going to have to find something to do with them anyways, or else we're going to have layoffs coming up.
So we just need the funding set aside.
That is
for
correct.
them.
Yes, that's all. That's all I have.
Okay. Well, and that's even better news, because while it may take us time to staff up on trimmers, we don't need any time to staff up on supervisors. And so I think that makes sense, members, too. Let's pull $500,000 out of that contracting set aside and use it to pay for additional supervision of contractors. Does that make sense? Okay, so I would also, just as a
You're keeping the 33 in each district and then pulling the $500,000 out.
Yeah, so you're right. So, and just to be clear on this, the $500,000 that was set aside for citywide overtime that would be, divided among the council districts.
Yes.
It's your view that that's about the maximum amount of overtime that current personnel could absorb, just because we're so shorthanded, right?
That is definitely correct. And every week that we go on makes it more and more and more difficult. If you figured now if we had three quarters of the weekends left, What are we looking at, 36 weekends basically?
Right. I mean, I would have loved for that number to be $2 million, but we just don't have enough
You're exactly right.
to work enough hours.
We're going to struggle now working every Saturday and Sunday to use up all that money.
So that being said, I think we keep the $500,000 for the overtime. Okay. We take $500,000 out of contracting and spend it on supervision. I would also say that and maybe this is a matter of just semantics, but in recommendation number 3, in which the CAO is instructed to analyze the true direct and indirect costs and so on, I think we have to include in that the additional cost of supervision when contractors are hired, and the additional costs that Mr. Blumenfield mentioned for bidding and so forth. Let's incorporate all of that into our cost analysis so that we have a true apples and apples kind of comparison. And then with the hybrid tree trimming program that's asked for in instruction number 4. I just want to underscore, I don't have specific language to add to that, but I want to underscore that while this calls for equal resources to both programs, the issue isn't just equality of resources. The issue here should be that it has to provide a fair competition between in-house and contracted services that truly analyzes the costs and benefits of each so that we can determine maybe it's not equal resources. Maybe it should be 70% in-house and 30% contractor, or vice versa. But we need to create a fair competition and a fair means of analyzing the costs and benefits of each kinds of service. So, and then by the time we're in the budget discussions for the coming budget, which is right around the corner
Yes,
now,
it is.
hopefully we'll have much more of this information to be able to make learned decisions about how we're going to move forward with the coming fiscal year.
Could we also add an instruction directing CAO to report back on the potential for both consolidation of tree trimming services and the opportunities and challenges for other city departments to hire city tree trimmers to do their work?
Absolutely.
You mean
go ahead.
Councilman,
services?
I'm sorry. There has been reports done on that in the past. And if you would like, I will go back and try to find some of those reports. They're quite a long time ago, but this has been asked before.
Yeah. Give them to him, because I want to be asking with new general managers.
Surely.
And
We'll get them to you if we can find them.
Also, the June report to Public Works left a few of the items that we had requested out for further analysis. When, under the ordinary course, aside from what we've asked for today, when would you expect to be able to have that part done? So, didn't address recent contract cost increases, in-house versus contract staff, or the question of consolidation. We had asked for all those things back in the budget process for this year's budget. So when is that going to be done? When are we going to have some hard analysis in front of us on those points?
All of those items? If those all are BSS, I will get back, and we will get back to you with that information this week.
Fantastic. That would
As for when we can have the information for you, I will get back a timetable.
That's fine, because, as I say, we asked for that during the budget process, and we need that in order to make an appropriate budget decision for the next year's budget. Because none of us want to keep kicking this can down the road. We don't want to just keep saying, well, we don't have the resources to figure out whether or not we can do less contracting. Let's just make the decision, figure it out, and come up with an appropriate
I agree.
allocation. I know you do. So, so we're all on the same page. All right. Anything else, members? Is that clear enough, Eric? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. All of the things we just said will be the action of the committee. All right. Is there anything else before us? Yes, we have item number 5.
Item number 5 is the City Administrative Officer report relative to the 2013-14 Capital Improvement Expenditure Program year-end reappropriations.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. Good afternoon. Alma Gibson with the CAO's office. Our office is transmitting to you our annual Capital Improvement Expenditure Program, CIEP, Reappropriation Report. And as you all know, at the end of each fiscal year, all the CIEP project accounts uncommitted balances revert to the unallocated balance within the special fund from which they were appropriated. This is primarily done in order to re-examine the need to continue to have funds appropriated for these CIEP projects. Bottom line, this is just another control mechanism that we use to keep track of CIEP project appropriations. In May of this year, our office instructed the city departments to submit their request for the need to reappropriate funds that are still required to continue to fund their active projects. The departments were instructed to review all project account balances and identify the amounts for reappropriation and/or reversion using the criteria established in Attachment B of this report. In addition, departments were instructed to provide justification as to why the reappropriation was still needed. If funds were no longer needed, then they were recommended for reversion, which could then be used to fund the next year's appropriations and/or recommend for reprogramming. Our office has reviewed each of the department's submittals, and via this report, we are recommending the reappropriation of approximately $138.7 million in project funds listed in Table 1 of this report. I could go through each of the attachments of the report if you like, or answer any questions that you may have.
Members? Oh, looking at the wrong report, sorry.
It's all right. All right.
Okay, so where there's reappropriation, the project is ongoing. This is simply a way to preserve the budgeted amount for the next fiscal year when it's
That's correct.
presumably going to be spent.
Yeah.
And the $58 million of reversion funds, in those cases, either the project's not going forward or there have been project savings or for whatever other reason, the amount that had been anticipated to be spent is going to be reduced.
Exactly. It's no longer needed, and it will be reduced by that reverted amount. That's correct.
Okay, so have each of the respective council offices that have projects been a part of the discussion to determine that, in fact, the council office agrees that those funds are no longer necessary, or
Yeah, that responsibility, that responsibility has fallen to the project managers that oversee these projects. When they submit to us their final dollar amounts that they recommend for reversion and reappropriation, we are with the understanding that they gotten the agreement with the council office where this project belongs.
Okay.
I'm looking at my staff to see if that's accurate with us. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got a lot in yours. I think I only have one in mine. Just out of curiosity, how the reversion, how does this compare to previous years? Is there a trend that we should be aware of in terms of, that this reversion amount is alerting us to, or is this just standard practice and there's nothing to be gleaned by this list? Because I look at it as a layperson and I don't really make heads or tails of it in terms of what it's telling me, how to interpret this information. So if there's you've seen these things before, is there something that we should be gleaning from them?
Yeah, the reverted amounts, again, are determined by the project managers. If they feel that, again, the projects are completed, that no invoices paid, that all the invoices are paid, that there hasn't been any activity for the last 3 years for these projects, and that sometimes the amount that was initially appropriated to the projects has actually turned out to be more than what was needed, then they recommend to revert.
I understand that, the process. What I'm trying to understand is if there's, because it should be a signal, right? If every year for the last 10 years, the amount that's being reverted is increasing by a substantial amount, then we're appropriating too much to projects.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, if the reverse is happening, then we're cutting things too close to the margin.
Mm-hmm.
There's some sweet spot out there that, is the right amount that should be reverted, and, somebody can do a doctoral dissertation on that, but none of us want to spend all that much time on it. But I just don't know if there's anything we should glean from this. How does this compare to past years' reversion numbers? Is it always about the same amount as a proportion? Is there anything
That's a good question.
Because I can't get it just looking at it.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I guess I could do that is look back in terms of what the dollar amounts have been for at least the last 5 years. But it is not always going to be all the same because the number of projects in the CIEP program varied every year as well. So it all depends on, how many projects were funded, and then these projects are completed throughout various years, and so there's different schedules as to when the total dollar amount reverted is going to be recommended based on the project schedules. I guess, like I said, I could look back and check to see if there's any drastic differences in the total number of
Nothing jumps out
projects.
as
No.
out of the ordinary for the reversion numbers that we're seeing, or the types of projects that we're seeing that are being reverted, or any other analysis that should be done to these numbers that these, I don't know, I'm throwing it out there really. It's kind of a fishing because
No, that's a good
when I
question.
look at numbers, I try to see where, what is it,
Yeah.
what is it telling me? And I don't know what this is telling me, other than the facts of, yes, this is the amount that was reverted.
Okay. Well, we'll look into that, and maybe next year, again, we could go ahead and, or, before it goes to council, I could go ahead and try to give you some information as to how drastically it's changed, but I mean, the analysis for next year then also include, what you're recommending in terms of how the reversions are, being affected.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
And you might flag that issue so that when the CIEP comes up for discussion and budget in the
Good
coming
point.
year,
Yeah.
we're able to speak to how the reversions have changed over the years.
Okay.
And that may inform us about what we need to do for next year as well.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
There were a couple things I had some small questions on. My staff is talking with her. I'm okay with this moving forward, but I'd like to reserve the right to maybe make a technical amendment if one of them or two of them proves to be
Okay.
problematic.
No problem.
And I just want to note that the Colfax Bridge project, important project in my district, apparently came in $3 under budget.
Oh.
We're reverting $3
Yes, it's
back.
unfortunate we have to report to that degree, yes.
All right, thank you very much. Without
Eagle Rock
objection.
came in $1.
There's several for $1, yeah.
You beat them.
All right, so we're receiving and filing that report, I think? Okay. All right. Without objection, that'll be the action of the committee. And if there's nothing before the committee, we have general public comment.
No, recommendation, to reappropriate the money.
Right.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
we're not receiving and
No.
filing. So the committee will act to approve the recommendations, and without objection, that'll be the action of the committee. And then we're now in general public comment. We have no general public comment cards, so that's closed, and we are adjourned.